Welcome back to the channel. Today I will be flying solo. Could you please drop a like at any time during this video? It really helps with the YouTube algorithm to get our stuff out there so other people can see it. And if you don't mind, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can see our videos, watch our videos if you like us enough. I will be starting with the SEC East today in Georgia, the champion of that division last year. They went 11-3 and 7-1 in the SEC. Their offensive rank was 14th in the country out of 130 teams, so a pretty productive team on offense. They averaged 37.9 points per game. Their defense was very good also. They were 15th in the country, allowing 19.2 points per game. Returning production, 69th out of 130 teams, so they return a little bit, but not a lot. Their 5-year recruiting average is 4th in the country, which is elite. They've been recruiting very well the past 3 or 4 years since Kirby Smart's been there, and before that they were good, but he's just taking it to a next level. 2019 they actually ranked 2nd in recruiting, so even above that 5-year average. Their offensive coordinator last year was Jim Chaney. He was a little bit conservative, and a lot of Georgia fans called for his head after the season. They thought they could do much better with the talent they had around them. They thought they could expand the field and not just throw hitches, posts, stuff like that. They wanted to take shots down the field, get a little bit more creative. He actually left. They didn't fire him, but he did leave. He went to Tennessee, took that job at OC, and they'll have James Coley as the offensive coordinator this year, who was their co-offensive coordinator last year and QB's coach last year. Key losses, Elijah Holyfield, over 1,000 yards rushing with 6.4 yards per carry and 13 total touchdowns. And if not for the bad 40 time, probably would have been a decently high draft pick. People get caught up in numbers. I watch this guy. I think he's a bowling ball. I think he's a stud. I think he's a really good running back. He did get picked up. I'm not actually sure who he got picked up by, but whoever picked him up, he'll be successful. I think he's a good player. They lose their top 5 wide receivers. Mecole Hardman went to the NFL. Riley Ridley, NFL. Jeremiah Holloman was unfortunately kicked off the team. They were actually looking at him to be the leader this year at wideout and produce the most at wideout. Terry Godwin, also the NFL, and tight end Isaac Nada also went to the NFL. Though they didn't use him, properly. That was another complaint Georgia fans had of Jim Chaney. Linebackers DeAndre Walker and defensive lineman Jonathan Ledbetter combined and had 8.5 of the 22.5 total sacks Georgia had as a team last year. I believe that number was dead last in the SEC with 22 sacks. It wasn't very good, and you lose the 2 guys that were best at getting after the quarterback. But again, you recruit at an elite level, so hopefully you can replace those guys. Ledbetter wasn't just a player, though. He was a very he was a good player, obviously, but he was also a leader on that team, so you're losing leadership with him. Key returning, though, you bring back a top 5 quarterback in the country, Jake Fromm, 2,700 plus yards passing, 30 touchdowns, and only 6 interceptions. He plays good in big games, so he's played good in the championship game his freshman year and played good in the SEC championship game last year for 3/4 of that game. But the whole Georgia team only played good for 3/4 of that game. They obviously let that slip away, and that has to be eating at them this year to make a return to that championship game and get revenge on Alabama. They also bring back running back DeAndre Swift, 1,346 yards from scrimmage. He also had 6.4 yards per carry and 13 total touchdowns. He's a great back. He's going to be an NFL running back. He's going to be a first-round NFL running back. He's Sony Michel, but he's a little bit quicker. He also makes people miss a little bit better than Sony Michel did, but he's a really good player. They also lose their they get back their top 3 tacklers, including safety Richard LeCount. And the biggest problem with what I heard from Georgia fans last year about him was his tackling. He wasn't a very good tackler, but he led him in tackles. I didn't have any stats to see how many tackles he missed or how many tackles he left out there on the field, but that was a main complaint of Georgia fans. So maybe he can get better in that account. But he did lead the team with 74 tackles. 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen starters come back. It's probably the second best, maybe the best offensive line in the nation. It's undoubtedly a top 5 unit, top 5 offensive line unit. Probably with Oregon, Alabama. Those are probably the top 3. Georgia this year, I have going 12-0, or actually 11-1. I changed that. like I said in a previous video, it's very hard for a team to go 12-0, and I'll very rarely choose that. So I went back. I had to pick a loss. Every team's going to lose a game this year, most likely, other than Clemson because of the schedule, because every team does. Every year you look back on college football, you have a head-scratching loss from almost every team. And Georgia has had head-scratching losses in the past. I have a win starting out the season at Vandy. Then they go home to play Murray State. That's a win. Win versus Arkansas State. And then you get Notre Dame at home. It's probably one of the best non-conference games of the year. But I'm not high on Notre Dame. I'm usually not, because I think they don't have the NFL talent in bunches like some of the top schools do. I think they have them, and they're starting 22. If you were to just put them on the field and let them stay healthy, I think they could beat most teams. But the problem is you see injuries, and we saw that last year in the playoff game versus Clemson. Julian Love, their cornerback, went out. Probably their best player, maybe second best on defense with Jerry Tillery. But Julian Love went out, and they struggled mightily after that. So I think Georgia gets the win there. They have a bye. Then they go on the road to Tennessee. Now, I almost picked them to lose this game, but they have a bye before. So I don't think they're going to have a bye, go on the road, and lose to a rival in Tennessee. I just don't think that's going to happen, so I have a win there. I have a win versus South Carolina. Then they have another bye, and they're at home versus Kentucky. I have a win there. I have versus Florida. And this video is being made after week 0. If Florida doesn't improve, this is going to be a bloodbath in Jacksonville. They call it the cocktail party. Well, it may be a massacre at the cocktail party. Florida has to improve. Felipe Franks has to get better from week 0 till then. If not, it's going to be very ugly. But I have Georgia winning that game. I would have had Georgia winning that game regardless if I didn't see Miami, Florida. I also have a win versus Missouri. And here comes their first loss. They're going to lose at Auburn. I just think Auburn's going to surprise them. Like I said, every team, I think, other than Clemson is going to have a loss this year that's in the top 25 that can compete for a college football playoff spot. And I think this is going to be Georgia's loss. Now, it could come at Tennessee, but like I said, a bye week before that, so I just don't see it. It maybe could come versus Florida if they get their act together, but I definitely don't see that. I think it's actually a higher percent chance they lose at Tennessee than they lose in Jacksonville to Florida. Then they play Texas A&M at home. If that was on the road, I would probably choose that as the loss, but it's not. So I have that as a win. Then they end the season with Georgia Tech, who is not a very good team. I predicted 2-10, and they got destroyed by Clemson on opening night. So 11-1 for Georgia. Next, we go to Kentucky, who had a very surprising year last year. They went 10-3, 5-3 in the SEC. Their offense ranked 85th in the country with 26.6 points per game. Their defense was elite, very elite, and that has a lot to do with a key loss I'll get to. At 16.8 points per game, that was 6th in the country. Returning production is 114th, and they lose a lot of production, and you'll see why when I get there. 5-year recruiting average is 34th, and they were 34th in recruiting last year. Key losses. Benny Snell, maybe the best running back in Kentucky history. 1,449 rushing yards on 5 yards per carry, and that's not behind NFL players. There may be one or two offensive linemen that block for him that might make an NFL team, but that's not elite NFL talent like DeAndre Swift runs behind, or Alabama running backs like Damian Harris and Joshua Jacobs had the pleasure to run behind last year. He also had 16 touchdowns. Just a lot to replace there. Like I said, probably the best running back in Kentucky football history. And on the other side, they lose probably the best defensive player they've ever had in Josh Allen. 88 tackles, 21 tackles for loss, 17.5 sacks. The Chuck Bednarik Award winner. That's the best defensive player every year gets that award. And he was undoubtedly the best player they had, and undoubtedly the best player on defense that year. I haven't seen someone that dominant in the SEC in a long time. Probably Von Miller is the person that comes to mind that was that dominant on defense and turned into a very good pro. And he's been tearing it up with the Jaguars. I think that was a steal in the draft with the 7th pick. I don't know how he fell that far. They do have some pieces returning though. And quarterback Terry Wilson, he only had 1,889 yards passing last year with 11 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. He's going to have to get more efficient. He's going to have to probably passed for around 25 to 3,000 yards, somewhere in between there this year for Kentucky to repeat what they did. Unfortunately for them, I don't see that happening. He also had 547 rushing yards with 4.1 yards per carries and 4 touchdowns. So he's a dual threat quarterback. He's a decent quarterback. He's probably what you would expect at a university like Kentucky. They also have wide receiver Lynn Bowden Jr., who led the team in receptions with 67. He also had 745 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. Linebacker Cash Daniel was 3rd in tackles, and he was the leader on defense and team captain. They lose their other 2 leading tacklers, so he'll have to step in, hopefully become the leading tackler this year. And they're going to have a lot of holes to fill on defense. A big one in Josh Allen, and you're just not going to be able to replace that. Even at a school like Alabama, I don't think they're going to be able to replace Quinnen Williams as well as he played last year. I definitely don't think Kentucky's going to be able to replace Josh Allen as dominant as he was, especially at a place like Kentucky. Kentucky this year, I have them going 7-5. They have wins versus Toledo, Eastern Michigan, and Florida to start out. I probably would have picked them to lose to Florida. I'm not going to lie here. Before I saw Florida week 0, but that's a win now. I was unimpressed by Florida, and we'll get to them next, but just very unimpressed. They have a loss at Mississippi State, a loss at South Carolina, then a bye, a win versus Arkansas, which is the garbage pail of the SEC. They lose at Georgia, then they lose at home to Missouri, then another bye. Every team has 2 byes this year, just how the schedule sets up. Some even get 3. Then they lose to Tennessee, a win at Vandy, and a win versus UT Martin, that SEC special second to last game. You always get a cupcake at the end of the season. And then a win versus Louisville in a rivalry game. I think they'll win that game. Louisville's not very good. Next up, we have the Florida Gators. They went 10-3 last year, 5-3 in the SEC. Their offense ranked 22nd in the country with 35 points per game. Their defense was 20th in the country with 20 points per game, but they lose a lot of talent, especially NFL talent, off that defense. Returning production, 26 of 130. Their 5-year recruiting average is 13th. Again, SEC teams, for the most part, recruit at a very high level. They were 9th in the country last year. But let me touch on that. That's a lie. That's not true, because a lot of people did not qualify for their academic standards, weren't able to join the team. They had people who said they were going to be enrolling and going to Florida. They committed there and didn't enroll. They also had people kicked off the team from that recruiting class. So it's actually one of the worst in school history. It's not the 9th. It was ranked the 9th, but with all those losses, it's one of the worst in school history. And I think that's part of the problem of why they're not going to be as good as we thought they were at the beginning of the year. They also lose, like I said, a ton of NFL talent. Voshawn Joseph, leading tackler, gone. Safety, Chauncey Gardner, gone. He's on the Saints now. He led the team in interceptions. And Ja'Kai Polite, he was the leader in sacks with 11 and tackles for loss with 9.5. This guy single-handedly, when I watched the LSU game, just stood out to me. He jumped off the screen. He was getting after Joe Burrow every other play. It was insane how productive he was in that game. And I didn't watch much of Florida last year. I think I watched 2 games. I watched the Georgia and Florida game and the Florida LSU game, and he just jumped off the screen to me on versus LSU. Their defensive line also jumped off the screen to me. Not just defensive line, their front 7 when they played Georgia with that goal line stand down there. I think Georgia had 7 plays from their own 1 and didn't move the ball into the end zone, which is very impressive. Key returning. Now, when I say key returning and I mention this guy, it's probably not very good, because he's gotten worse from what I saw, but we'll have to mention him anyways. Quarterback Felipe Franks, 2,457 yards, 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. This guy plays very well versus weak competition, but if you have any competent defense, he will fold. He's not good under pressure. He's just not. If you look at the games where they needed him last year, a good quarterback's supposed to step up and get big games, and he didn't. The Georgia game, didn't play very well. The LSU game, they won, but he still didn't play very well. There's other games to mention, but those are the 2 that come right to mind. And Miami game, he played bad. If you put him behind that Miami offensive line, which is an absolute garbage unit, I think, and you put Jarren Williams behind Florida's offensive line, I think Jarren Williams in Florida probably win that game by 20 plus points. Felipe Franks is just not a very good player. He'll make 1 to 2 plays and you'll be like, wow, okay, that was pretty good. Then he'll make 2 to 3 plays and you're like, what are you doing? I had to put him on here because he's a starting quarterback for a good university. He does return, but it's a bit iffy at this point. Running back LaMichael Pirine. Now, this is a bright spot. What I saw in that game, he was missing tackles. He had a little bit more receiving yards than last year. It seemed like they were giving the ball to him out of the passing it to him a little bit more. He had 826 yards last year with 6.2 yards per carry and 8 touchdowns. I expect those numbers to jump up, and hopefully for me, they do. I have him on my college football fantasy team. So if he does better than that, I'd be very happy. Kadarius Toney, you got to find a way to get this guy the ball. He's a do-it-all player. Wide receiver, you got to pitch it to him, throw it to him, hand it off to him. Whatever you can do to get this in his hands, because to me, him and LaMichael Pirine are the guys you're gonna have to rely on this year. I didn't really see much else out there. And if you're gonna make Felipe Franks throw the ball a lot, it's best to do so where it's easy throws, screen passes, bubble passes, throws of that nature, because I don't think he can push the ball down the field. I haven't seen it. He hasn't proven it to me, so I don't think he can do it. CJ Henderson, positives on him. He hasn't allowed a touchdown since 2017. He's a first-round draft pick. He's a projected first-round draft pick. The thing is with him, I watched him. This guy does not like to tackle. There were so many missed tackles in this game, and he was a large part of that. And I saw him run with people and then try to arm tackle, and it was kind of like a half-ass tackle. He wasn't enthused to tackle people. And if that doesn't change, he'll fall in the draft. I don't think he'll be a first-round pick. That's what happened to Greedy Williams last year, and I think Greedy Williams is probably better than him. And Greedy Williams didn't tackle people, so guess what? He fell to the second round. I could easily see that with CJ Henderson if he doesn't improve in that aspect of the game. South Carolina, 7-6 last year. A lot of people are predicting them, including Paul Feinbaum, to be a bounce-back team this year, to go 9-3, 10-2. I don't see that. They went 4-4 in the SEC as well. Their offensive rank was 57th with 30.1 points per game. Their defensive rank was 69th with 27.2 points per game. Key losses: they lose NFL wide receiver Deebo Samuel. He's on the 49ers now. I think Kyle Shanahan is going to have fun using him in creative ways. He led the team in receptions, yards, and touchdowns with 62 receptions, 882 yards, and 11 touchdowns. The guy's a playmaker. If you get the ball in his hands, every time you give it to him, he could take it to the house. He's just one of those type of players. Quarterback Rashad Fenton led the team in interceptions last year. He's no longer with the program. Returning production, they ranked 45th. So they rank pretty high in returning production. And their 5-year recruiting, again, another SEC team that recruits well. 20th over 5 years, 17th last year. So Will Muschamp's been recruiting well while he's been there. Key returning, Jake Bentley, 3,171 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. He just needs to tone down on the interceptions. If he does that, he'll be fine. He's one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC, though. And I think he gets the job done. Running backs, they bring back both their main running backs, Enrico Dowdle and Mon Denson, who rushed for had 1,200 yards from scrimmage combined and 7 touchdowns last year. They also bring back wide receiver Brian Edwards, 55 receptions, 846 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Linebacker TJ Brunson led the team in tackles, sacks, and tackles for loss. So that's a big playmaker back on defense. I think this team's going to be pretty decent this year. I actually have them going 6-6, and it's because of the schedule. The schedule is very hard. They play Clemson, they play Alabama, and they play Georgia. They play the top 3 in the AP poll, which not many teams have done in the history of college football. We have 2 teams doing that this year, and they're one of them. They're playing their first game, North Carolina in Charlotte. If this was next year, I would predict North Carolina to win this game because I think Mac Brown would have this thing going, but it's for North Carolina. South Carolina is going to get the W in this game. Second game, they play Charleston Southern. I think that's a win. The next game, they get Bama at home, but it's a loss for me. I just don't see it happening. Then they go to Mizzou. I have a loss there as well. I have a win at home versus Kentucky, then a bye week. You get Georgia after a bye week, which is very interesting. I could have predicted them to beat Georgia, but I don't have that. I have a loss versus Georgia at Georgia. Then I have a win versus Florida, a loss at Tennessee, a win versus Vandy, a win versus App State, a loss at Texas A&M, then a bye, and then guess what? You get Clemson. Like I said, you play all three teams in the top 3 of the AP poll. I just think it's going to be a tough year. They may be the best 6-6 team in college football history. They may be. And I have them losing all 3 of those games versus the top 3 opponents. At this time, they're the top 3. That could change by the time they play them. Next, we have Missouri. This is a very hot pick for the SEC East. A lot of people are taking this team second, and some people are even going out on a limb and picking this team first. I'm not as high as everyone else, but I'm high. I do think they'll have a good year. They ranked 18th in the country with 36.6 points per game last year. 50th in the country on defense with 25.5 points per game last year. Their returning production is 81st in the country. Their 5-year recruiting is 38th. And last year they were 17th, so a lot better than normal, a lot better than average. They actually recruit on the lower end of most SEC teams, but 38th still isn't bad. Key losses, though. You lose an NFL quarterback in Drew Lock, drafted in the second round by the Denver Broncos. He had 28 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. That's a little bit down from what he had the year prior. He actually had, I believe, 46 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. But he became a better percentage passer last year. He's a little bit more careful with the football. Wide receiver Emmanuel Hall, 37 receptions, 828 yards, 22.4 yards per catch, which is insane. He's a big play threat. I mean, to have 37 receptions and 828 yards tells you everything you know. He's a big play threat, big wide receiver. He was 6'4", good jump ball wide receiver. If he was a bailout throw pretty much. If you needed something and you're under pressure and you just want to throw it up, you throw it up to him. He also had 6 touchdowns. Defensive tackle Terry Beckner Jr. He was first in tackles for loss with 11 and second in sacks with 3.5. He's also in the NFL now with the Buccaneers. And they lose linebacker Terez Hall, second in tackles for loss with 9 and first in sacks. So they lose 1 in tackles for loss, 2 in tackles for loss, 1 in sacks, and 2 in sacks. They lose both those guys. That's a big loss for Missouri on defense. Key returning, though, Larry Roundtree III, 1,216 yards on 5.4 yards per carry and 11 touchdowns. What can I say? That's pretty good numbers for a running back at Missouri. They like to run the ball there. They like to get their running backs out in space, throw a lot of screen passes, throw a lot of dump off passes to the running back. They also get back one of probably the top 3 tight ends in college football, and Albert Okwuegbunam, I believe you have to pronounce the name. It's a very hard name to pronounce. He's an NFL prospect. He'll probably get drafted in the probably day 2 of the NFL draft. He had 43 receptions with 466 yards and 6 touchdowns. And right now he is actually the number 1 tight end prospect, but he's no doubt top 3. Wherever you look, he's going to be top 3 in tight ends. They also get back linebacker Cale Garrett, who was first in tackles with 106. And they added Kelly Bryant. People can say what they want about Kelly Bryant. I like him as a quarterback. I think he's pretty good. I don't think he's great. I think he's probably a step up from some of the quarterbacks we've talked about. Felipe Franks, I think he's better than him. And I think he's on par with Jake Bentley. We'll have to see, though. This offense relies heavily on their passing game. And like I said, though, you have Larry Roundtree. You can get him involved in the passing game. He's a very elusive running back, and maybe you can get him involved in swing passes, screen passes, just dump off passes. I don't think you can push the ball down the field like you could with Drew Lock, because Drew Lock's got a cannon of an arm, and Kelly Bryant doesn't really have that. But he'll add a nice running ability to Missouri. They had that with Lock, but he wasn't the same type of runner. Kelly Bryant's more elusive and agile, where Drew Lock is. He can get out of there if he needs to, but that isn't his. That's not what he likes to do. I have Missouri going 9-3. So on par with what most people having them go, I'd say on average. But there's some people that are very high that I think can go 11-1. I don't see it with this schedule. It starts off very easy, though. They're at Wyoming, which is a W. West Virginia, which is a win because they've lost so much. Then they play at home versus Southeast Missouri, a win. South Carolina at home, a win. And I like how they go on the road for Wyoming, and then The schedule makers have them on or at home for the other 3 games after that, and they're all pretty easy games other than South Carolina. They have a bye week after that. Then they go. They're back at home versus Troy. That's a win. Home again, Ole Miss. Then they're at Vandy and at Kentucky for the next 2 games. I have a win on the road at both those places just because I believe Vandy's not going to be very good this year with what they've lost, and same with Kentucky. If this was Kentucky of last year, if you added Benny Snell and Josh Allen back on that team, I think Missouri would lose that game. There's a bye week after that. Then they're on the road at Georgia. Now, with the bye week, they could put up a fight versus Georgia, but it's at Georgia. And for that reason, I'm going to have to give them an L. Then I'm going to have them losing at home to Florida, even though they've destroyed Florida the last 2 meetings. They've outscored them by a ton of points the last 2 games. I think that trend breaks this year. I think Florida wins. I have to find wins for Florida. They're not going to be 6-6. I don't think they're going to be 10-2 either. So I have to find wins, and that's one they will get at home versus Mizzou. They're at home again. Tennessee, I think they lose that game. So that's 3 straight losses, but they'll end their season with a win versus Arkansas. Next, we have Vandy. Vandy went 6-7 last year, 3-5 in the SEC. They ranked 72nd in the country on offense with 28.5 points per game, and 61st on defense with 26.6 points per game. So average on both ends. Returning production, 91st in the country of 130 teams. 5-year recruiting average is 53rd, which is one of the lowest, if not the lowest in the SEC. They were 56th last year in recruiting. Key losses, Kyle Shermer. One of, if not the best quarterbacks in Vanderbilt history. He had 3,130 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. You're losing a good player, someone who will probably be a career backup in the NFL, but for Vandy, that's a good player, one of the best they've had. Linebacker Jordan Griffin, first in tackles with 119. And cornerback Jawan Williams. He's actually on the Patriots now, 2nd-round pick. He led the team in interceptions with 4. It's going to be hard to replace 2 of those guys for sure, and Kyle Shermer and Jawan Williams. I mean, when you're getting guys at Vanderbilt that go into the NFL or that are in the NFL, that's losing a lot. Like I said, they don't recruit at a very high level, and it's hard to recruit there because of their academics. It's just going to be a tough year for them, I think, this year. But they do have some very good players returning, and probably future NFL players such as Keyshawn Vaughn, probably the most underrated running back in SEC, if not the whole country. I don't think many people have heard of him, but he's very good. 1,244 yards on 7.9 yards per carry and 14 total touchdowns. They also bring back Kalijah Lipscomb, their leading wide receiver, with 87 receptions, 916 yards, and 9 touchdowns. They bring back another great tight end in the SEC, Jared Pickney. 50 receptions, 774 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Right now, he's rated as the 2nd best NFL prospect at tight end, but he's for sure, again, top 3 with Albert Akabawene. I have them going 4-8. I actually found another win for him because I just think Derek Mason's too good of a coach. He always finds a win in the schedule that you just don't think they're going to get. They do start out with a very hard game, though, obviously, with Georgia. That's a loss. They're at Purdue. That's a loss. Now, they might have a chance versus Purdue because Purdue lost a lot as well. But it's on the road. And again, if I think both teams are even, I'm going to pick the team that's at home, and Purdue happens to be at home, so Purdue's winning that game. The next week, they have a bye. Then they play LSU at home. That's a loss. Then they get their first win of the season versus Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois lost a lot, and I don't think they're going to be a very good team. And Vandy's in the SEC, and they recruit SEC type players, and they recruit enough of them that I think they can beat a team like Northern Illinois. They're at Ole Miss. Guess what? I think you got another win there. I actually had Ole Miss originally winning this game, but I just think Vandy's going to find a way to win that game at Ole Miss. Then they go again back to back, or 3 wins in a row for you guys at UNLV at home. I think you win that game, but here comes the losses again. A loss versus Missouri. You have a bye week. You go on the road versus South Carolina. That's a loss. At Florida, another loss. Kentucky, a loss. And then you have a win versus Eastern Tennessee State University. I think you have a win versus them, and then a loss at Tennessee. So you finished the season 4-8. In regarding what you lost or what kind of talent you recruit, I think that's a pretty decent record. I don't know how Vanderbilt fans will feel about that, but in my opinion, that's a decent record. Next up, we have the Tennessee Volunteers. And I think most college football fans are waiting for their return to what we saw in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I may have them there. We'll see. They went 5-7 last year, 2-6 in the SEC. Their offense ranked 108th in the country with 22.8 points per game. Their defense was 77th in the country with 27.9 points per game. Returning production, second in the whole country. You return pretty much everyone that had an influence on this team. 5-year recruiting, 14th. They've recruited great. And that's what's so confusing and so perplexing about this team. You look at them and you think, wow, this team could be so good. I mean, a couple years ago, I think they were a top 10 team, and they almost lost the opener. I don't know who it was. It was like 3 or 4 years ago under Butch Jones. And I remember checking on my phone. I'm like, how is this game even close? And it was. They ended up pulling it out. It was the first game of the season. I don't remember who it was against, but Alvin Kamara was on that team, and you see what he's doing in the NFL, and he did nothing with them. Were 13th in the country in 2009 in recruiting, and then key losses. I have none. Returning production is second, so mostly everyone's back. That's important. Quarterback Jarrett Garantano is back. He had 1,907 yards passing, 12 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. This guy's one of the toughest quarterbacks in college football. Behind that offensive line, he got beat up. He went out of games, came back in them because they could not protect him. They need to protect him this year because I think he's got a chance to be a decent quarterback, but it could be another DeAndre Francois at Florida State situations where if you get beat up enough, eventually your mind will quit and then your body will follow. So they need to protect him. Running back Ty Chandler, he had 1,813 yards from scrimmage and 7 touchdowns. All 3 starting wide receivers come back, and Marquez Callaway, Josh Palmer, and Jawan Jennings. And Jawan Jennings was a highly rated recruit coming out of high school, and he's never really lived up to that billing. The only thing that he's really known for throughout college football is that catch versus Georgia on the Hail Mary to win that game. I believe that was him, and that was one of the best games of probably the last decade. Linebacker Daniel Bituli is the leading tackler. He'll be back, but he only had 79 tackles, so their tackles were spread out, so no one really stood out, but he was their leading tackler. They also had Darrell Taylor, defensive lineman, led in tackles for loss with 11. He'll be back, and sacks with 8, so that's a big key piece on that Tennessee defensive front. They bring back cornerback Bryce Thompson. The problem now with him is he's indefinitely suspended because of an assault case, and he was a freshman All-American last year. He led the team with 3 interceptions, so he's a very good player. So they need to get him back on the field as soon as possible because that is a thin position for them, but he stands out there, and they need him back as soon as possible. They also got a transfer who was ruled eligible by the NCAA, and Aubrey Solomon from Michigan. He's a defensive player on the defensive line. He's going to be a good player. I think he was a 5-star recruit. May have been 4, but either way, that's another really good player they have coming in. I have this team going 9-3, and that's a surprise for most people. I think that may be a little bit high, but I just think they bring back everyone. I think Jeremy Pruitt is going to improve the defense, especially they have talent there, and if Bryce Thompson comes back too, along with the other guys there, they have enough talent to go 9-3. I think that's the ceiling, though. I don't see anything past 9-3. Realistically, most people will probably have them going 8-4, and that's probably more realistic than my 9-3. But I have them going 9-3. I have wins versus Georgia State at home, wins versus BYU, which will be a tough game at home, wins versus Chattanooga at home. Then they finally go on the road, and this is their first loss at Florida. I just don't think you're winning in the swamp. I just don't see it. Maybe you can. You might be able to. There's a bye. Then you play Georgia at home. That's a loss. You play Mississippi State at home. I have a win there. You go on the road versus Alabama, and you're just not ready for that type of football yet. So I have a loss there as well. Wins versus South Carolina, UAB, and at Kentucky for the next 3. And then wins at Missouri, and then versus Vanderbilt. So you win the last 5 games of the year. Realistically, they're probably going to be 7-5, 8-4, but I'm high on this team, like I said, and I have them going 9-3. That'll do it for the SEC East. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said before, please click the like button down below. It helps a lot. And also hit the subscribe button if you liked it, and there'll be more content like this on the way. Thank you. Have a good day.